It's the Draftsmen Show.
My art teacher keeps giving me assignments to learn about artists, but I don't like learning that way. Best approach to learning art history or artists? Well,
I've got an opinion about that.
to learn about artists, so not learning from artists.
I got an opinion about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
You've got two options. One is to pay attention to your teacher and say, maybe my teacher knows more than me, and I'll do that. And you might be right or you might be wrong. I don't know. I don't know your teacher. But there's another option, and it seems like what you're leaning toward, because you say you don't like it, take responsibility for your own education. Just say, look, I'm going to pursue what I love. I've seen some artists really do great. I've seen artists become millionaires doing that, become millionaires by not listening to their teachers. But one of them that I can think of that became a multimillionaire also had serious gaps in his training because he didn't learn anatomy, and yet he had anatomical figures that didn't have the anatomy in there. So you take responsibility for it. That if you really don't like what your teacher is assigning you, question your teacher. Question whether it's worth it. And if you decide it isn't worth it, do your own thing. That way you are self-motivated, and you might decide a year or 3 later that maybe it was a good idea after all.
I think we know who you're talking about, Marshall.
Yeah,
Millionaire that didn't learn anatomy.
Yeah. I'm going to give an example though of a teacher that in the 1990s, I had known this man. He was a teacher at school. He was my teacher in college, but I had known him for about 20 years, and we had a lot of mutual respect. And I was doing very well as an illustrator, making good money, and I was doing some of my best art too. And I was confident enough to say, look, if you had any advice to give me, what would it be? What would it be just at this point in my life? And he answered so quickly that I felt like he had been waiting 20 years for me to ask this question. He immediately said, work bigger, work bigger. You do these tiny little drawings, and it's sort of like, see, I'm dancing. And I thought, I don't know about that. Rembrandt and Dürer and a number of other artists whom I admire extremely, Da Vinci, they did tiny little drawings that are some of their masterpieces, and I liked working small. I didn't like working big. But a few years later, it was about 2 or 3 years later, 1997, I remember it. I saw why he told me that. There was a tight, crimped, sticking down into these tiny bits that needed to be loosened up. It needed to be shaken up. And he saw that in me, and I didn't see it in me until I did. So sometimes, if you got a teacher you trust, sometimes they'll tell you, you ought to do this. You ought to do this. I'm telling you, you're relying too much on digital, and you may be right or they may be right. I hope that answered your question. Oh, gosh. Lots of hearts. Thanks, Logan. Thanks, Chloe.
Marshall's loving the hearts.
All the TikTok.
Wow. I love it. Yeah.
Can you guys send some TikToks in the chat, please? Yeah, Marshall, I like your answer. You could listen to your teacher or don't listen to your teacher.
Yeah, that's your responsibility.
Exactly. Your teacher is not responsible for you getting good. Or at least not in this country, I guess.
Shouldn't be.
Shouldn't be. Yeah, shouldn't. You should take control. You do what you know you need to do to get better at what you want. There's so many artists that I've heard that say, man, my teacher just didn't believe in me, told me not to do this thing. It's like, if everybody trusted their teacher, that some people wouldn't become who they ended up becoming. And so you have to trust your gut. If you have your best interest, I think, at heart. You know what you want. So make sure you follow that, but also know when you are limited in your knowledge and when your teacher knows more than you, and you should listen to them. So, yeah.
Yeah, either extreme. Whatever the teacher says, I'll not listen to it. Or whatever the teacher says, I'll obey completely. Either one of those extremes is going to give you trouble. It's discernment.
Yeah.
As often is the case. Okay.
But also, if your teacher gives you exercises that the teacher's probably right, but you just hate doing it, I would say just don't do it until you get to the point where you actually are ready for that. And there's no point of doing something you don't like. Well, sometimes there is.
Have we talked about salads on this podcast?
What? No,
have we
only
talked
yogurt.
about salads?
Only yogurt.
Okay, well let's talk about salads.
Okay.
Many children do not like salads. I was appalled at the idea of a salad when I was a kid. And then in my 20s, I fell in love with salads. And I think that if you force a child to eat salads, that it could turn them off to it because it's a negative emotional experience. But if you watch what happens naturally, there comes a point where you want new flavors and new combinations of flavors. And it does come up. You're not so afraid of that anymore. And so it may be a natural part of the maturity that you don't like something because you're just not ready for it.
Yeah. Or you're just excited about something else that is also good, but your teacher says that this other thing is more important. But, learning art is not linear like that. You can bounce around from one thing to another. There's so many fundamentals to learn that there's not one specific thing to start with or to move on to next. I always had projects at home that I would work on that I was excited about. Not the thing that was being taught in class. But a lot of times they would kind of overlap a little bit. But if I was excited about something completely different, I would go down that path. I would always try to do things I'm excited about because those are the things I'm going to learn more, is the things that I'm passionate about.
I agree with you, but Stan, we are so 21st century California. Follow your bliss, do your own thing, know your passion. This is so different from a style of education and training historically, where you've got the martinet with the whip who says, no, not like that, like this. And I am not big on that, but there is something to be said for that. Hey, here's something. Calling these seminars boot camps. You know how when you call them a boot camp, we found out that if you call it a seminar or a webinar, it only sells so much. But if you call it a boot camp, it sells more. And
really?
I think the reason,
we got to do
that. The reason
we're
is
not
because
doing courses anymore. Only boot camps.
Yeah,
they're serious.
There's so many students who say, I want somebody to kick my butt. But, there is a time when there is appropriate, not demand, I don't think. I don't want to be in a boot camp where you actually have to do it. But if you say, I'm willing to submit to this, and I'm going to do 120 drawings in the next amount of time, and then I'm going to do this really hard work in this next few days. And when it's submissive, when it's by consent, that you don't have to do this, but you're willing to put yourself to that tough task, that's where it is exciting. The thing that I don't like doing this, but I know it's good for me, there's tremendous value in that.